I like your suit today, just so you know.
Thank you.
No.
My old one.
Really?
I like it.
Well, Steve, let's just hop into it because you have a phenomenal book. And I just want to ask first off, what made you write the book?
So I'm a First Amendment law professor, and I specialize in religious freedom and freedom of speech in particular. And, those are controversial topics, and there's a whole bunch of other controversial topics that spin off of those, right? How to interpret the Constitution, abortion rights, LGBT plus rights, campus protests, academic freedom, lots of really controversial things. And I travel all over the globe talking about those really controversial topics. And what I realized is that as I was traveling around talking about these issues, that I was having productive conversations with the people that I would engage with. And I started to ask myself, well, what is it that we're doing? What is it that we're doing that's allowing us to have productive conversations about these really difficult topics when most people, when they talk about these things, just devolve into shouting matches and argument? Mm-hmm. And so I spent the last 3 years really studying and trying to research and figure out what were the habits of these people who could have really productive conversations about difficult topics, including habits that I was employing, but I didn't really know I was employing them, right? Trying to figure that out and then put them in a book so that anybody could use them for any type of difficult topic, not just these hot button political issues, but difficult family situations, difficult situations in the office place and in the work setting, like all the types of things that this audience is dealing with. What are these habits that would allow people to have productive conversations about hard topics? And that's how the book came to be.
Yeah, and you spoke about the political things that are happening, that's tough conversations, especially right now in this climate. But as you read this book, you kind of stay pretty nonpartisan throughout the whole time. So I'm interested to know, first off, how difficult was it to do that? But also, why did you try to steer away from not talking about those type of issues?
Well, I mean, the book was not about politics. The book was about how to have productive conversations about hard topics. And those hard topics, we see them in our family dynamics. We see them in the workplace. We see them at schools, at churches, anywhere where we have to deal with another person. Difficult conversations come up. And so for me, it was pretty easy to stay away from the political topics. But I have to emphasize, and I say this right in the introduction, this book is not meant to justify or support the political right or the political left. It's not about politics. It's about how do we have healthy conversations about the difficult situations in our lives. That was the goal. And so it was easy to stay out of the politics. And I tried to give lots of examples of conversations that have nothing to do with politics, right? Parenting and dealing with siblings or dealing with rude Uncle Johnny when he comes for Thanksgiving, right? All those types of situations are the types of situations we try to deal with in the book, although I do touch on some political things as well.
Yeah, we'll speak about that parenting one a little bit later on. Okay. But right now, I do want to speak about something that intrigued me from the first line of the book. In habit one, you kind of started off with the childhood story of yours and how you learned about assumptions. And so as we all know, with assumptions, whenever you assume, you make out of you and me, what I'm saying, how people say. So could you tell us about just that story, that childhood story real quick?
Sure. So the first chapter of the book is about the importance of intellectual humility and recognizing how much trouble we get in life when we assume we understand something, but we don't, and we have strong opinions about it, but we don't, right? So in the First Amendment realm in particular, lots of people have really strong opinions about religious freedom and free speech, and they generally know nothing about either one. So I tell a story about how the kind of trouble we can get in life when that happens. So when I was 9 years old, I grew up in a little town in New Mexico. My family really did not have a lot of money. It was a small house. We all kind of shared one bathroom. And little boys like me at the time liked to spike up our hair. That was the cool thing to do. So I went into the bathroom and I grabbed the mousse and I put it in my hair and I spiked up my hair and I was pretty proud of myself. And I went strutting out of the bathroom. And as I was walking out, my mom walks by and she starts sniffing. And she says, "What is that smell?" And I very proudly said, "It's the mousse." And her eyes got really big. She grabbed me, she spun me around, pushed me back in the bathroom, ran my head into the sink and started washing my hair out without saying a word. It turns out that what I thought was mousse was actually her hair removal product, Nair. And for the next week, all my hair started falling out. And for the rest of the summer, people thought I had some horrible illness. So we get in trouble in life when we think we know about something and we don't, and we have strong feelings about it. And intellectual humility is critical.
Yeah, I love that story because I have 3 older sisters. And so I know that smell in there.
I wish I had your knowledge. Sadly, I did not. That would have helped me.
Well, I've been appreciating the knowledge that you've given me while reading this book. And you spoke about intellectual humility and how, with some people, where they feel like they know a lot about a topic when they really don't. They're very passionate about that argument or conversation. But with the impact of intellectual humility is when you recognize, oh, wow, you don't really know that much about a topic. And so that simmers down that argumentative state. And so when you try to have conversations with other people who may think they know everything about a topic, how do you navigate that? But then also, how do you recognize your own intellectual humility and acknowledge that as well?
Right, yeah. So the book is about establishing habits, and it's not just some people. Research has proven that all of us, when we learn a little bit about a topic, tend to have really strong opinions about it. And it's only after we keep learning that our opinions tend to soften. And so scientists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's been pretty well established. I went to law school at the University of Michigan, and every single day as I walked out of the law school, there was some words etched into one of the doors above, the frieze above the door, and I would read it every single day when I left the law school, and it said, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not." And that has become ingrained in my mind as something to remember. But now the question, of course, is how do we establish that in ourselves? How do we build that intellectual humility in ourselves? One really good habit you can get into. All of us strut around the world enjoying something called the knowledge illusion, and it's this idea that we think we know way more than we actually do. We think so. If you think about humanity has amassed a massive amount of knowledge about all sorts of different topics. Any one of us actually knows almost nothing. Like, just think about you and me right here. And we're sitting here thinking like we know what's happening, but look at our two chairs. If you start to ask yourself, how is this chair manufactured? What were the exact materials that were used? How are the molecules holding together? In which different countries were involved? What were the socioeconomic regulations that made this possible? What were the legal regulations? Where did it all come from? How is the atmospheric pressure in the room affecting the material they chose to build this
Lord
out of?
Mercy.
All right. If I could go on, right? Yeah. The point is, you and I know approximately a little above 0% of the knowledge available about the chairs we're sitting in. But we'll argue for 17 hours about tax policy and who people should vote for, right? We don't know very much.
Yeah.
And if we can all just acknowledge, and this is really helpful in the business world. I was just talking the other day to a senior business leader, wildly successful chairman of a large corporation. He was talking about how recognizing how little he knows and how much he can learn from the people underneath him is one of the most critical skills that has allowed him to thrive as a leader. So he works so hard to make sure the people who are, afraid of him because of his position to feel incredibly comfortable sharing their ideas and giving him information and challenging the way he's thinking, because he recognizes how little he knows and how much he can continue to learn. Engaging in that habit of just asking yourself, how much do I really know about the very place I'm sitting right now, is a really good way to remind yourself that on so many other topics, you also don't know that much either, and you can always learn and develop more.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the highlighter I used was honestly gone after the first habit, so I appreciate that. But also in habit 3 also stuck out to me as well. The title of that is Assume the Best in People. I know that's hard for a lot of people to do, assuming the best out of people. But in that, one thing that stuck out to me was how you explain the surface level argument that you may be having with someone may not be the root of why y'all are having that discussion. And so you advise us to ask questions to figure out what the real root is of why you have such strong opinions about that topic. And so why do you advise people to ask those questions to get to the root?
Well, this is a habit I realize that really good peacemakers, I call someone a peacemaker who's able to have productive discourse about hard topics. And one of the habits I've realized that peacemakers engage in is when somebody comes to them and they have a different opinion, or they have maybe a controversial view, or even if they come in really hot about something, they tend to assume that person likely has a good motivation for why they're acting the way they are, or why they are thinking the way they're thinking. And most of us actually kind of strut around the world thinking there's 3 kinds of people, right? We think there's the people who agree with us, and then there are monsters and fools. It tends to be how we walk around the earth looking at things. Peacemakers don't do that. They tend to think, okay, this person disagrees with me. They have a different take on this situation. I need to understand better where they're coming from. And so they'll ask questions to try to get down. You might have a disagreement up here. What you realize as you start to ask questions is, hey, okay, we agree on the end goal here. We agree on the end goal. Where we disagree is what we need to do to achieve that goal. So let's realize that we're both neither of us is a monster or a fool. Where we disagree with is the methodology to get where we're trying to go, and then now let's have a conversation. Or if you ask questions, understand underlying motivations, and you realize you genuinely do have different goals, then you can have a healthy conversation about what's the end goal, what are we trying to achieve. But until you figure out exactly where your disagreement lies, by asking questions, assuming people have good motivations, you're gonna have a very hard time having productive discourse. Now, I'm not naive. I know that there are fools and monsters in this world.
Yeah, talk
right?
your stuff, Steve. Yeah.
There are bad actors, but generally speaking, in our families, in our work lives, and the day-to-day people we're having contact with, it's not a good practice to start off assuming the absolute worst about somebody. You're going to have a very hard time solving a problem in the office, solving a problem in an employment situation if that's where you start. Now, through asking questions, if you find out they actually are a fool or a monster, great, you figured that out. That is progress in a conversation, but it's not a good place to start with that assumption.
Yeah. Habit 5, you used a word that may trigger some people in here, gaslight. Right. And so
everybody's favorite word since 2019 or something.
Yeah. And so you brought up a story though about how a mother asks her daughter to take out the trash and her daughter says, "You're always yelling at me." And so you take one conversation of taking out the trash and now the conversation has moved to, am I always yelling at my daughter? And so when you have these conversations, when it comes to gaslighting or maybe feeling like you've been gaslit, why is it important to maybe recognize, or would you recommend trying to figure out if this is a gaslighting situation? And if so, how do you go about calling it out?
You know, what's funny is sometimes accusing someone of gaslighting is a form of gaslighting. So you gotta be careful. But many of the habits, not surprisingly, in the book that I talk about are actually habits that we should all engage in long before we ever get into a difficult conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of habits that I talk about in the book of how to respond to bad forms of argument in real time. And gaslighting is a bad form of argument. And we do it all the time. It's not just something that happens in the political sphere. It's not just something that TV talking heads do or politicians do. One of my children is one of the best gaslighters on the planet. I mean, he is so good. And when I finally came to understand gaslighting, I was able to start calling him out on it. And I talk about this in the book where, this kid, and this is a good example, right? You'd say something like, "Son, your chore is to take out the trash. Take out the trash." "Well, why are you always yelling at me?" That is gaslighting. If I respond to that by saying, "I'm not yelling at you," or "I don't always yell at you," he has won. Yeah. Because he's pivoted off the topic of the conversation, which is it's his chore to take out the trash. And he's pivoted it to, "Why are you always yelling at me?" So I say, "I'm not yelling." "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." "You're yelling at me. You always yell at me." "I don't always yell at you." Notice how we're now 2 degrees away from the point we were having, right? Gaslighting is a methodology to shift the conversation away from the topic subtly. And if you continue to engage in it, what you find is, 45 minutes later, you're 18 topics away. You don't even remember what you started with, and you're all worked up about something. So the key is at the very beginning move. At the very beginning move, "Why are you always yelling at me?" We'll talk about that another time. Right now, I'm focused on you need to take out the trash. We can talk about that later. You always bring it back to the topic, and you keep your voice calm. Gaslighting usually comes in the form of an accusation, so you want to get defensive and defend yourself. And the key is to recognize it, recognize that someone's shifting the topic. So my son was a master at this. He would do it, and every time my wife and I would crack down at him. And finally, when I learned what gaslighting was, I called him out. I said, "Son, you're changing the topic. We're not gonna." I'm using the word son. I call him by his name, but you don't need to know his name. So So I'm like, "Son, you're changing the topic. I'm not going to let you do that. We're talking about whatever it is I was talking to him about." And what's funny is that worked. He stopped doing it. And then about 2 years later, as he matured in life, he came up to me and he was like this sheepish grin. And he was like, "Dad, you know how you always told me that I was changing the topic?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "You're right. That's exactly what I was doing." But here's the thing. He was like, this goes back to assuming the best about people. He was like, "I didn't even realize I was doing it." It was a natural thing. Many people just naturally gaslight. It was something that he was just doing reactionary as a 9, 10-year-old boy. As he matured, he realized he was doing it because I called him out on it, and he kind of he apologized. That was like one of the best parenting moments of my life, right? But that happens all the time in the work setting as well. People come in really angry about something. They try to gaslight you. You don't respond. You don't get defensive. You pivot back to the topic at hand. Keep the focus on the conversation. And emphasize, we'll talk about that another time. Right now, I'm focused on these sales numbers or trying to resolve this particular dispute with a customer or whatever it might be.
I bet y'all didn't think y'all get parenting advice today, huh? Yeah, it's a guy right here. Also, in habit 7, we both relate on this topic. I suck at this. Spending time with people.
Yeah.
Right. Especially people that you love. And so why is that so critical for healthy dialogues?
So one of the things I emphasize in this, the problem with writing a book like this is then everybody assumes that you're going to be good at all the habits. And then if you're not, you get judged for it, right? Like, don't be a hypocrite. That's not the nature. This book these are habits I learned from a lot of different really excellent peacemakers. And I'm not the best at all of them. These are all habits we could work on our whole lives. One of these habits is spending time with people doing anything other than talking about hard topics. And I am the worst at this because, there's a reason I'm a law professor who specializes in the First Amendment and freedom of speech and religious freedom. Like, I love talking about these things. What I have found is that when I'm sitting around watching the ball game with buddies, they really don't want to hear about the campus protests and whether or not what the University of Texas did is consistent with the First Amendment, right?
No way. What?
Like, they don't want to hear about that. They just want to have fun watching the game. And peacemakers are good at this. They're good at going out and having fun with people and leaving the really hard topics for another time. So we have like Thanksgiving coming up, right? There's no reason around the dinner table that we need to be having a political conversation. Just enjoy each other's company, recognize that you're building relationships, that you're spending time with people, and then later you can have the more difficult conversation. In the workplace, this is critical, right? Spending time with your colleagues, spending time with other employees in a way where you're just building the relationship and you're not dealing with the hard topics allows the later conversations that will inevitably come that are difficult to be far more productive. But if you're not good at that, I am guilty of being somebody who's just incredibly focused on what I'm doing, the task in front of me, and not spending time with some of my colleagues. Well, when I have to go have a difficult conversation with them, that makes it very hard for me to have that conversation. So I have to consciously free myself from my productivity, what I see as productivity, and just go enjoy time with people so that they can get to know me as a person. And then when we have to have difficult conversations, they're so much better. But that does not come naturally to me at all. And I wish it did, but it doesn't.
So you're not friends? I thought we broke down that barrier.
Yeah, no. So I'm an introvert. Like, I mean, you wouldn't guess it up here on stage. I'm talking a lot, but like, my favorite evening is being alone. Yeah. That's what I like to do.
I don't mind you. I feel you on that. All right. In the last few minutes that we have with these beautiful people out here, when it comes to any advice that you would love to give our HR leaders before they go back into their workplaces, especially like in this time of like change and disruption?
Yeah. Buy my book and tell 1,000 of your friends to do the same thing.
Mic drop.
No, I mean, I can't emphasize enough the idea that the ideas in this book are ones that we could all spend a lifetime perfecting, right? Nobody has perfected any of these things. And I don't mean the book to be exhaustive. I encourage people, if they learn about some of these skills, to take the skills that they already have, that they're aware of, and add them to them. But, all of us, I think, should be in the process our entire lives. We use the phrase a lot in the business world or in many worlds of like a growth mindset, right? Mm-hmm. And becoming a peacemaker is not something we're going to do overnight. Each of us can read some of these things and realize where our weaknesses are, and then spend a lifetime learning how to be able to have these conversations and put these habits in place. And I guess, in my opinion, that process of becoming someone who can do these things, it'll be a life well spent. I think it'll be a productive life. It'll make our family lives better. It'll make our work lives better. It'll make our political discourse better. And so I would encourage people to take that attitude of always looking for ways to continue to grow and develop the traits that come from these habits.
And can I ask you just one last thing? What was one habit that may have been the toughest for you to put and apply into your own life?
It really is the spending time with people thing. Okay. I mean, I look like people always, when I go in front of an audience, people are always like, "Oh, that could be fun to hang out with." I'm not fun to hang out with. I like to talk about political topics, and I like reading. So I'm fun to hang out with when I'm watching college sports, college football. That's good. I can do that. So I actually have to. That's how I bond with people. Come to my house, we'll watch a football game. As soon as the game's over, I'm like, get out. Anyway.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Steve, so much for your time. And thank you for the book, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks all of you. Appreciate it.